Hello, everyone. So my name is Bhaskar. I will let the panelists introduce themselves. This panel is really about talking about the economics of data breaches. I think it's an interesting topic. It's probably deeply technical in some sense. It's also funny because there's a lot of funny stories about data breaches that we'll talk about. And I'm also glad that in this panel we have some folks who have had some very close encounters with this particular topic. So towards the end, we'll also try and look into the crystal ball, if you will, and see if we can make some predictions. Who cares if they come true or not, but we can still make some predictions. So without much ado, let me get started. And why don't each one of you introduce yourself and give a little more context in terms of your role, your organization, and maybe how data breach is related to some of your work in the past, and we'll get started.
All right, so I'm Yash Kadakia. I run a company called Security Brigade. And for the last 13 years or so, pretty much data breaches are a daily part of my life, unfortunately, because our job is essentially breaking customer systems, breaking customer networks, platforms, and we see evidences of data breaches, evidences of compromises pretty much every day of the week. So yeah, it's a very real part of my day-to-day life.
Hi everyone, I'm Suchit Mishra. I'm currently the CISO at Audi's autonomous driving division in Munich. Prior to that, I've worked in security at Uber, Grab, Flipkart, a lot of tech companies, Adobe, Salesforce, primarily in the US. And unfortunately or fortunately, I've had the experience of dealing through breaches at some of these companies. So hopefully you might find some of my insights valuable. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Manu, Zacharia. I run a conference called Cocoon, as well as I run a research organization called Information Security Research Association. Apart from that, I have my own company called Hackett. So that's my quick introduction.
Sure. Thank you so much. And we also have the world's, okayest hacker. So he's definitely qualified to speak on the topic, at least with the T-shirt, right? So we'll start with you then, Yash. So they say that there are two types of companies, right? Ones that have been hacked and ones that don't know that they've been hacked. So what is your opinion about that? Is that really true?
I mean, of course, yes, 100% true. There's no question about it. But I think not just companies anymore, it's individuals as well, right? So what we've typically seen, as in what I typically see when I interact with people as well, right? It's when you talk about a data breach, it's a very virtual concept. It's a very far away concept, right? And then when you open up the dark web or you open up whatever dark web search engine, plug in their email address, and then they see that they were part of 30 different data breaches in the last 2 years, right? It turns a lot more real then. And even then, every single time, right? So I'll be talking to CISOs, I'll be talking to security heads, technical people, right? And every single time I pull up the dark web, they're super surprised. They're always shocked that, oh, my password's there as well. Which is then sort of makes you question, right? If you work in security, are you really surprised that you have been hacked already or you have been compromised already? And that mindset is sort of the root of the problem there, right? People go with the assumption, it's not me, it's him. It probably won't happen to me. I sell cars or I manufacture something. Who wants access to my data or my information? There is no value there. It's typically the mindset you see. So a very real problem that we run into pretty much every day there.
Sure. So I'll move over to Suchit with a slightly different question. Now, Suchit, you have obviously been a custodian of some incredibly valuable brands from a cybersecurity perspective, right? Uber and Flipkart. And it's fair to say that all of these organizations have optimized for growth, right? And that sometimes comes in the way of being a little safe, right? So let's say hypothetically one of these were breached, right? So what 3 things would come to your mind as a leader of cybersecurity in this organization? These are the first 3 things I'm going to do as soon as I hear about a breach at Uber.
Yeah, I think the first thing, this is again very typical, going into a war, right? You have to contain the damage for the company right away. I mean, many people spend too much time thinking, hey, why did it happen and what we could have done and all that. But doesn't matter at that moment. It's about how quickly can I contain the situation and how quickly can I respond. to my customers, to my stakeholders, and make sure that they're aware of what happened. And then the third thing would be getting back into business as soon as possible, right? Because time is money in this context. And of course, the more this lingers, the more fear, uncertainty, and doubt lingers in the minds of the people, your customers, your stakeholders, your investors, and you want to put them at ease saying, okay, thing happened, it was a mistake, or whatever that may be, but we have it under control now, right? I think that is the message. The more you panic, the more things get worse. So the most important thing I have learned in all this is always you have to stay calm and not blow it out of proportions, and the last thing is not to blame your peers in the room saying, IT, you guys goofed up. I've been telling you this for the last 5 years and you did not listen to me, and look what happened today. That's the last thing you want to do when you're in the room with these people. You say, we're all in it. We'll get through this, right? And later on, you can do the root cause analysis and figure out what you could have done better, right? And then use that as a teaching moment or a learning moment. Yeah.
Just to add to that, right? If you've gotten to the point of breach without that plan already in place, you failed in multiple ways already, right? So you should already have that, what am I going to do when everything burns down, plan, written, put down, documented, rehearsed, on a boardroom level, on a technical level, on an operational level, already have that in place. So
it's very hard to think through all those things, right? What happened at Uber, like, we're running a bug bounty program. Nobody had thought that a bug bounty hunter would go rogue or whatever, right? That was taken too far in that context, right? We all believe that there is a responsible disclosure and people will stay within that contract, right? But you cannot anticipate all the scenarios, and there's going to be this last minute. But the more prepared you are, the better, of course.
And this is actually a really interesting point, because a little bit going off, but this is a problem I've seen in multiple places. When your data is worth so much more than the bounty you're offering, how do you prevent that guy from just being, maybe I'm just going to go to the dark web, put this data up, see how much money I can get, as opposed to go get the swag or the $1,000 or whatever the corporate is giving out to me. And that's always going to be a tempting challenge when it comes to, because the value of data is just growing exponentially, right? That single breach at Uber would probably be worth a tremendous amount of money versus whatever the bounty was offering. So that's always a challenge we're going to have with this bug bounty world that we're in now.
But it's interesting, if I may continue, like if you look at Apple now, right? They're offering $1 million for the most glaring security issue, right? The remote, full, no user access, sort of no user interaction sort of thing, right? The reason they're paying $1 million is that is what it sells in the black market for, right? So they're just evening out the playing field completely, that, hey, there's no point going to the black market. Come to me, I'll pay you the same amount of money. So the incentive is completely changed, right? The breach is completely prevented. And I think what I saw, if I remember, right, they were saying in the beta releases, if you find something, we'll pay you 50% more, right? Because a bug or a data breach prevented is way more valuable than once it's in the field. Right? I think so. That's the right incentive if you want to, do this right. I feel like.
And I'm glad you brought that angle up, because I'm sure there are a bunch of aspiring hackers here. So we'll talk in a bit if you want to actually build a hacking company, how to make money. So we have some great tips on how to raise money. We'll talk about that. So let me get to Manu for a second here, right? So I'm going to make a statement. Maybe it's a provocative one, and let's see, get some reactions from you. So in my opinion, I think. Data breaches have become like potholes, right? We have been desensitized to this fact that our data is getting breached. And if I may be so bold and say the likes of Uber and Flipkart and Amazon gets away with it, because I'm not bothered extensively to come out on the street and make a show about it, right? Oh yeah, my data got breached. So what's your reaction to this? Do you think we've been desensitized to data breaches?
I always start with my perception of security is all about being prepared for the unexpected. So, just take the example of coronavirus. We were not expecting this and suddenly it happened. So, are we, in a position to secure it? It's something similar to that. Yes, see. So, the second is, it's a state of well-being. Security is a state of well-being is how I define it. So, yes, data breaches are going to happen. It is the amount, like what he said, it's exponentially increasing the value of it. Now, how do we disclose it? How do we find the right balance is the question that every organization has to take. So we have to take into consideration the brand value as well as the liability towards the end users or the customers, as well as the compliance part from the legal perspective. So somewhere we have to find a balance between these three and then take the policy and take it forward.
Sure. So adding on to that question, right, there was a big Sony breach. I don't particularly remember the year. And there are senior Sony leaders on record saying, we will not invest $10 million to save potentially $1 million, right?
Yes.
So let's have all of your takes on this particular question when a senior leader of a exceptionally well-known brand makes a statement that I have a potential loss of 1 million, but I have a very real investment of 10 million, and I'm going to make it a business decision. So let's start with Manu, Suchit, and Yash.
So the very basics of security, we say if you want to protect a 10 rupee data, don't put a 50 rupee firewall for that.
Yeah. You might want to take your mic a little closer.
Oh, yeah. So the very basics of security that we say is if you have a 10 rupee data, don't put a 50 rupee firewall for it. But it's not just the data, it's the brand value. What is the compliance part, like what is the penalty if you don't follow the policies, the standards and all those things. So it's not just what you are protecting, but the holistic picture, like the bigger picture, what is the future if you don't protect or if you don't invest. It's not just the current, it's the future also. So that's how I look at it, right?
So Suchit, what's your take on that? Will you invest $10 million to potentially protect $1 million?
So having gone through this a couple of times and dealing with business, right? I mean, they really think, and this is sort of, I'm putting it there versus us or whatever, but it is business at the end of the day, right? It's pure economics, right? Even a hacker who's spending time writing the exploit, if it is not a vulnerable thing that will fetch him millions of dollars, he's not going to spend 6 months working, like the phone-to-on contest, right? People are spending 6-9 months creating that exploit so that within the first hour they can pop the Tesla and win the Tesla and win $100,000, right? So the amount of, it is directly proportional, the ROI, it has to be, right? So and to your point, what has happened in the industry, despite all these Target breach happened, Sony breach happened, Adobe breach happened, the market has come to the understanding that this is just the same as accidents on the road. People are going to die, and we today live with the fact that 1 million people in the world die on road accidents, right? Despite having the traffic lights and safety belts and airbags and everything, right? So it's sad, but it's true. And that's why this whole push to autonomous vehicles now is that, okay, maybe we can save 1 million lives in a year, right? Because some people think that is more valuable, and they're spending billions of dollars now. So you can see the asymmetry, but they believe that by spending billions, they will not only get safety, but they will make trillions of dollars.
Correct.
Right? Which is why the real investment is happening. Right? So business is always going to take front and center. I mean, no matter what. Yeah.
All right, Yash.
So I think it's also, you have to factor in a couple of different things, right? The ROI is very different. So one is, I'll give you an example. 15 years ago, I go and buy my dad a laptop. I got him a Windows laptop at that point. And he starts using it. He's using Hotmail and he's got something set up and he starts plugging his information on every website and every single thing he can see, right? And I'm just like, Dad, you're going to get 1 billion spam emails. He's like, what does it matter? Like, what's someone going to do with my data, right? What's the value here? I might get something free or whatever it was, right? And he would go ahead and do that. 10, 50, immediately after that, I moved him to an Ubuntu laptop with a Windows skin to take care of to mitigate the risk. But 10 years later, 15 years later, today he gets 1 billion spam messages on his phone every single day, 1 billion spam mails every single day. And part of the problem, right, is the end users typically don't care about their data, right? Every single person here has had their data breached at least 30, 40 different places in the last couple of years, in the last 2 years, right? Whether it's the Zomato breach, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Dropbox, whether it's whatever else it was, right? Nobody really cares. No one is going on the road protesting. Nobody's really saying, I'm going to stop ordering stuff from Zomato. I'll go to Swiggy now because you guys had a breach. I'll take my business away, right? So the cost dynamics are changing drastically. As a business, if I am Zomato, for example, I'm going to think I have to spend 50 million on security. We had a breach and we had a minimal impact, right? We spent a couple of $1,000s on PR. Everyone's forgotten about it now. Nobody cares the data's out there. What's the value? And then you have another twist to the story, right? Cybersecurity insurance. Now a $500,000 breach is going to cost me as a company $100,000 in premium, and I can forget about it. So the question is, would you rather invest 10 million on security, $1 million in the breach, or 20,000 on cybersecurity insurance to sort of forget most of the risk, right? And that dynamic of the user not caring and the insurers willing to obviously insure things cheaply because there's no compliance, especially in the Indian context. There isn't really a disclosure law. There isn't really a penalty mechanism. There isn't really a stick, essentially, right? That they don't have an incentive to bother spending that 10 million.
Cool. So if you think about it, right, it's very interesting. I can bother each one of these gentlemen here just a little bit, the pothole example, and make a lot of money, right? So I really want to actually do a startup now. I think I'm convinced after talking to you guys. And it's going to be about data breaches, right? So, I mean, just walk me through. Where do I start? Do I go to IIT, hire engineers? Where do I set up my office? What kind of infrastructure will I need? Like, how do I build a startup in breaches that's going to grow 30% year on year? Let's start with Manu.
Okay, definitely. If you're planning to start an organization with this objective, the first requirement is definitely the resource pool. So definitely, it's not just the human element, but the place also matters. So probably a place which can provide you some level of, the infrastructure advantage, the resource pool advantage. So first is the location. Second is the resource.
So where do you recommend I put my R&D center?
It depends kind of what kind of R&D if you're into. If you're into the grey market, then maybe Romania or some of those places. Yash will be talking about one of the places very soon after me. So maybe one or two places that we can have where there is some kind of protection for our research. Secondly, the infrastructure has to be really good. Nowadays, I don't think it's a problem. The infrastructure, when we talk about infrastructures, then we have the VPN, residential VPN. A lot of technical terms are there, which gives you some level of anonymity when you do the research and all those things. And definitely the seed funding.
And in terms of, let's say, the programming language, should I go for Python guys or Java guys or .NET guys?
So from a technical perspective, I would always start with somebody who is very good in C and assembly language to start off with.
C and assembly. That's so counterintuitive though, right?
Yes, but somebody who has worked at the lowest level has a better understanding of how system works.
All right, so Romania, go for lower level languages and get seed funding.
Yes.
Right? All right, Suchit, how do I build a startup?
So I think you may still have to further curate the startup to say, what is it that you're going to solve in the data breach area, right? Is it going to be forensics? Is it going to be containment?
Are you solving a problem?
No, I'm not solving a problem. I'm stealing data, making money.
It's the other way around, right?
He's talking about a hypothetical situation where
he wants to retire, basically start stealing data and retire.
My startup steals data, sells data. So I'm just taking advantage
so you're
of
going to be a nice aggregator for data breaches.
Right. So what skill sets do I need?
Anybody has something to sell to him? Any fresh breaches, anyone?
I would definitely not advise you do that unless you want to end up in jail or whatever. But but yeah, if you still want to go ahead and you're this crazy entrepreneur who wants to do something, then yeah, I think you're going to have to. I think I would rather pick China as the hub, Beijing or some other place like that to get some.
See, experts never agree. One guy wants the R&D center in Romania, the other
because they're just very good at stealing stuff. I didn't say that in press.
Okay.
So that would be a good place to start. And because the talent is the key, at the end of the day, I think it's not the office, not the infrastructure. If you have some of these people who really know their shit, regardless of where they are, they can, I mean, that's all that matters, right? They have the whole instrumentation, they have the whole infrastructure to do that, pretty much. Yeah. And cloud makes it very easy. So you can just get an easy account in AWS or GCP. Everybody's offering you accounts, free accounts. Just go for it.
Got it. Suchit, Yash, go ahead.
So on the Romania point, right, just to add to that, I wouldn't pick Romania, but I'll just add to that. How many of you all have heard of Hackerville in Romania? Show of hands. Or watch the documentary on YouTube, Netflix, couple of places. Definitely watch it if you haven't. It's about this little town in Romania, right? I can't remember the name. It was a little bit hard to pronounce. 120,000 population. So probably less than an average building in like Goregaon, Bombay, right? So 120,000 population. It has a Mercedes showroom, an Audi one, a Beamer one, a Porsche one. Pretty much every luxury car that exists has a showroom in that little town of 120,000 people, right? Because you have a whole massive set of hackers that live out of that one town in Romania, who've then said, oh, my friend, why don't you come join my business as well? Why don't you start the scams as well? And they've created a whole economy of people who are getting pure cash money from all these scams, and they're then spending $400,000 to buy a nice luxury car and drive around, right? So Romania might be a good place to go, but probably expensive resources. They've already made a bit of money.
Yes.
So this hypothetical startup that's going to steal money, right? So ride up my skill set, because every time we're doing a customer audit, or we're doing one of our engagements, and then we see access to really good information, really good platforms, we're always tempted, right? Should I move out to the British Virgin Islands, get a passport like Nirav Modi and all of these guys, and start trading on the stock market and make a ton of money, right? But what I would probably do is set it up in India. If you look at the bug bounty system in India, right? These guys, kids are being offered $500, $1,000, and are spending their entire day and night hunting for these bugs and trying to find it, right? If you're going after the right data breach, I'm pretty sure you can make a couple $100,000 per breach that you're going after, right? More than that, most likely. So you can definitely offer them a bit more money, get them to now come spend their entire day and night breaking into whatever targets that you identify and going after those guys, right? And we already know India's track record in terms of tracking down breaches and going after actually arresting people. So it might be a decent safe haven for you to go about and do this as well, right? And then funding, I don't think you really need funding. So I'll give you an example, right? So we were working on some projects a couple of months ago, and this is a customer that has a boardroom management system that they're using, right? And we start doing our assessment, and we find that there's a backdoor in the boardroom management system that the vendor is put in, right? There's a really small vendor that was selling this platform, and this backdoor had been there for 3 years. Now, at scale, with about 100 plus Indian listed companies using this platform, with the backdoor to all of the boardroom communication data sitting there for 3 years, that's your funding right there, right? You read what these guys are doing, buy and sell some stocks, you've got all the money you potentially need. You don't need to raise any capital. You can keep all your equity, and you should be good to go.
Cool. That sounds great. All right. So we'll take a little bit of a detour here and get some insights about why this is such a tough problem, right? So literally billions of data records are stolen every single year. And the lowest hanging fruit, if I may, would be probably adopting encryption to some extent. Yet encryption is probably low single-digit adoption across the board, right? So why is that the case? The solution, or at least the medicine for this problem, is out there, but it's not. They don't like it. Why is that the case? So let's start with Manu, get some perspective of why encryption has such poor adoption.
Okay, so if you look at Bruce Neer's statement, he once said, there are two versions of it. I think the first version is, if you think technology can solve your problem, you don't understand technology and you don't understand the problem. And the second version of it is, if you think encryption can solve your problem, you don't understand encryption. So yes, encryption is good, but encryption cannot alone solve the problem. The second point is how we implement it. So even if you implement encryption, that doesn't mean you are secure. And there are multiple ways, or there are multiple researches happening where, hackers or researchers are trying to break it. So the point here is encryption alone, it's like the defense in depth, it's just one layer of it. So you have to, supplement it with all the best practices, the awareness.
But why would, for example, Zomato or Uber or whoever they might be, keep some of the data that got breached in plain text? Right.
Yeah, just to add to what I was saying, two examples I can quote. The first one was, if I'm not wrong, the Sony breach, where one of the most prominent factor was Sony was storing the passwords in plain text. It's not that Sony breach was the bigger point, but the bigger point here was a big company like Sony, how they are not following the best practices. Point number one. Point number two is Snapchat hack. If you remember Snapchat hack that happened, I think 4 or 5 years before WhatsApp introduced encryption. Snapchat introduced encryption, and one of the mistakes they did was their encryption key they hard coded into the source code itself. So encryption was there, but how it was implemented was the problem here. So again, coming to the best practices, understand how encryption has to be implemented. That should help us address this problem.
Suchit, what's your take on this battle between convenience and security? Like, encryption is not convenient, it's kind of clunky, right?
And I think there are three things that I have learned over the years. I think one is this perception, right? Most developers, I don't know how many developers in the room here, just to engage, and how many security guys, right? So it looks like there are more security guys in the room than developers. The developers don't listen to all this stuff. So when they pass out of school, they were told security comes at a cost. And they permeate that thought across the industry when they keep changing companies, right? So the mindset is, as soon as I do encryption, everything's going to come to slow, my performance is going to take a big hit. I just don't want to even entertain the idea, right? And you have a hard bargain as a security engineer to sell that, no, it's not that bad. Given today's computing infrastructure and everything else, it's not that bad, right? But you need to have hard numbers to prove to them. Otherwise, they're not going to entertain you, especially in data centers and at scale, right? So, two. And the second thing is, of course, the go-to-market thing, right? So, any new feature that is being built, business wants it live yesterday, right? And security, as always, is coming to the party late. It's like, tomorrow we have to go live. Security guys, can you do something? And, just tell me what is there. And then you tell, dudes, you have not used encryption. We'll get to that next release, right? And the next release, and never happens because the discussion is, encryption will slow things down and forget it, right? So, and to this point, encryption, of course, is one of the layers, right? I mean, you could have a SQL injection and your encryption has no meaning. You can all get the data still out without the encryption. But people should use encryption. I think that is it's almost like using a toothbrush to brush every day. It's like pretty reasonable now, to the point that it is ubiquitous, it's available, and the technology is there to support it. There should be very less excuses to not use it, especially unless you're dealing with legacy systems or SCADA or, like I'm now dealing with automotive and they tell me, ECUs just don't have the capacity, right? So we have to completely re-architecture everything. The CAN protocol does not support it. So those are legitimate reasons for not using encryption, which means you could do something else. But in the context of cloud and in current scenarios, there should be no excuses, I feel.
Sure. Just to add to it, we have the concept of the first triangle, the functionality, usability, and security. So somewhere we have to find the right balance between the 3 points.
Sure.
So I'll give you an example here, right? Everyone's known about the coronavirus. Everybody is afraid of the coronavirus right now. How many people in the audience went and bought travel insurance or something of that sort to safeguard yourselves, right? If something goes wrong here, how are you going to get home? How are you going to get medical treatment? How are you going to pay for everything? How many of your show of hands actually thought about that, did something about that, right? And this is nobody. So for the ones you can't see, and this is exactly what developers do with security, right? The idea is, yes, it exists. Encryption exists. A whole bunch of security capabilities exist. But the challenge is, why bother? Right? And that's as simply as it is, right? The developer has a whole bunch of priorities. He has business guys sitting on his head going, the release needs to go yesterday. We have X number of features that aren't built yet. They haven't been tested yet. They haven't gone live yet. And then security is a parallel track, right? And in India, again, more in the Indian context, again, this is my opinion. I don't know how much you guys would have seen of it. But you don't see threat modeling, you don't see security in the dev life cycle at all. So security comes absolute last, right? Product is built, it's packaged, it's ready to release. Can you please come review it now, secure it, stamp it, and let us go live with it, right? And then you have 2 days to release. Marketing's lined up, business is lined up, sales is lined up, everyone's standing behind security, going 2 days, do whatever you have to, you need to clear this app for me, get it live. And that's essentially where corners get cut, right? So encryption, it exists, it's easy to do, it's plug and play pretty much now, but it's just a why bother mentality, right? At startups that I typically have worked with and seen, the approach is growth is all that matters, right? Yes. If I need to do encryption, I need to now pull 2 engineers off my regular build cycle and do something else, and it's not going to work. And as Suchit said, at the legacy companies, it's always compatibility. It's always, but this integrates with 5 different systems. So we need to spend 6 months looking at the business impact from doing encryption, and it's going to get pushed back 3 quarters then.
Sure. So looks like at least from this discussion so far is that we'll forever optimize for growth, right? Okay. All right. So I'll come back to my hypothetical startup. Right? Remember the one we are making money with? So whoever wants to take it, whoever has a sense of how this is done. So my startup just got like 1 million records, okay, from a bank, for example. And I want to make sure that I really get good money for this, right? So walk us through what really happens once a group of hackers has exfiltrated 1 million credit card details. What do they do with it? How do they make money with it? How do they, get free food for their folks and all the incentives, the Ferraris, yeah.
Small with the food, man. You gotta go big.
Yeah,
we need MacBooks and Ferraris, and we need to really...
So walk us through it. I just exfiltrated data. Now what?
So probably two things I'll start with. The first one being covering your tracks in the sense that you should not do anything that will, that can track you back. Probably that is the first thing. And once we have done that, the second thing is how we monetize it. Preferably the darknet or all the closed networks are the platform for this, where we need to have some contacts with the brokers, and that's how it currently happens. I'm not advocating for it, but then what happens is somebody wants to do some black activity. Let's say he wants to hire a server, and what we generally do is we pay double the amount and then get a card. For example, if I want $1,000 credit, so I'll pay $2,000, buy a black card, and then use it to hire the server. So we need to find brokers and online selling spaces where we can use these cards. So that's the first approach, I would say, to monetize whatever you hack.
So I'll go a little bit back in the day with this, right? So about 15 years ago, I'll tell you what it used to be like and what it looks like right now. So I knew somebody, this is back before we started the company and in the hacker days of my life, right? I knew some guy on, I think, MSN Messenger or some IRC or something of that sort. He'd got 1 million credit card records, pretty much your scenario, that he'd stolen off somewhere. And I was kind of fascinated trying to understand what do you do with this information, right? And the cycle of abuse is really interesting. And this is before the dark webs, right? So you didn't really have brokers and you didn't really have all of this available. So he would sell his credit cards to some guy somewhere in Russia or Brazil or something of that sort for about a couple of dollars per credit card, right? So he would get $1 million or something of that sort. That was transferred to him using something gold, I can't remember, a PayPal-like service back in the day that used to have, virtual debit cards and you can go pull money out of the ATM and things of that nature, right? So he would get his money. He would get his $1 million and he would go away, right? Now the question is, are 1 million credit cards worth $1 million or are they worth more, right? So then the next step of the process would happen. So the guy who bought them in Brazil would go to India Time shopping or, whatever e-commerce shopping existed at the time. This is pre-Amazon, Flipkart for some of the younger people in the audience, right? And they would go and they would order a bunch of laptops and high-end resellable goods, right? And ship them to some random address in a small village somewhere, right? So somewhere in Jharkhand or somewhere in Bihar where the cyber police is not really going to be on them as easily. And one of their friends, or actually a third-party broker sort of guy, right? He would go and he would rent out that house for a small amount of time, cash payments, rent out for 1 week, spend 5,000-10,000 rupees, whatever it is. And all he would do is, all day long, people would send parcels to him. He would sign the courier, take the parcel, and that was his job, right? Stack them filled in the house with parcels. End of 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, he would take all his parcels, get a taxi. We didn't have Ola Uber at the time. Get a regular taxi and then get out of there and go to wherever he lives. And he would then sell these to other people in the black market who would then in turn sell them to retailers and would come out, right? And this was literally the process of monetization. Everybody across the chain was making some money off the transaction process. And that's pretty much what happens today, right? It happens in a little bit more sophisticated manner. So now you have standard data brokers on the dark web. So you have websites where you can just go sell credit cards. And the credit card guy is going to sell the personal information to somebody else. He's going to sell credit cards to somebody else. He's going to break it up into little pieces and sell it out, right? How many of you all have seen those work from home ads that you see all over the place, right? Railway stations and everywhere else. Have you all ever thought about why they're paying 40,000 rupees for you to work from home? Or, whatever they claim, right? And this is part of the data breach cycle. What typically happens is they'll contact you and say, okay, I'm employing you and I need to do some nonsense work. I'm going to transfer 50,000 rupees to your bank account. Or I need you to look after my India operations. I'm going to send you ₹1,00,000. Take your 40,000 rupees from that as salary and transfer the other 60,000 to this other bank account where one of my vendors is there where I need some work done. So you're happy. You're getting ₹1,00,000. You transfer the 60,000 out. You keep the 40,000 for yourselves. And a week later, the bank calls you and says, this was a fraudulent transaction. We need to take the ₹1,00,000 back from you. And you've now paid 60,000 out to somebody else. And this chain continues across countries to the point where the money can't be traced anymore. The hackers pumped their $1 million in, took about 500,000 back out of the other end through this chain of fraud and took that for themselves. And everybody in the entire chain lost all the money along the way because they all got scammed by it. So they come up with really creative ways to take money out, right? I don't know if you have a minute, but another case that I saw that was really fascinating So this is a few years back when mobile recharge sites were the thing back in the day, right? So we had a very interesting case that we did forensics for. We ran across a customer where these hackers had basically gone and copy-pasted the checkout page, right? The page where you put your credit cards in and just remove the credit card process. So you put in a phone number, you put in the amount of money, you hit recharge and it would go through the API and recharge it. What they then did was they went to all the street shops around Bombay and they started licensing it to different Vodafone shops and Airtel shops and all these guys saying, you do recharge using my website and I'll give it to you at 50% off. So the actual crime and the fraud was happening on the retail level. They would drive around on a bike once a week, collect the cash from all of these guys. And when that backdoor got detected, the company reaches out to all these shop owners. The shop owner says, we have no idea who these people are. They just came, approached us, offered us a deal and we took it. And they walked away with all that cash. So it's always an ingenious model to get that money out of the system.
Sure. Manu, you want to add to that?
Just to add to this, the cryptocurrencies now adds, another layer of anonymity to the money laundering part. So now I think it's legal in India now. Forget about the legal part in India. So, just like what he said, what used to happen 15 years before, now it happens through the cryptocurrency channels, which adds the anonymity also.
Sure.
So if I may add, I think they've already covered a lot of the bases here, and you can see clearly the whole supply chain is really strong. So from my previous
definitely stronger than the SCADA supply chain, I think.
Exactly, from the previous discussion here, supply chain for this business is really strong and very healthy and thriving. But the other way to do that is you just go back to the same bank that you stole money from and just say it's ransomware. We blocked your money. It's worth $10 million. Give it to me or whatever, or I delete all your data, right? And that may be just good enough. And most of these banks or companies, fortunately, now have cyber insurance. And they're happy to pay that for you. I was actually talking to one of the cyber insurance agents this few weeks back. And they told me, sir, this is the value add. Even if you get hit by ransomware, we will do the negotiation with the party. And we will pay them out. You don't have to worry. You'll get your data back. That's part of the business continuity plan now.
So it's very, very well organized, becoming very sophisticated.
The whole industry has come around to this, right? And there's a business now just doing this.
Right. So let's change gears a little bit and talk about this rising phenomenon of data nationalism, right? Data localization in a more technical sense. My data needs to reside in my country. So what's your thought on, is it going to make data breaches easier, harder? Probably it's got no impact. Can you kind of shed a little bit of light on what data localization might do to data breaches? Or is it going to be easier that if you want Indian eating habits, just go hack this data center?
As long as you're connected to the internet, I don't think it's going to make some difference because you are connected. It's like the coronavirus, whether you are in India or in some other country, as long as people interact, you are vulnerable. So I don't think it's a good concept, but from the data breach perspective, I don't think it's going to make a difference because, again, are we using the Indian softwares or Indian hardware? The point lies in the bigger picture. Just by putting Indian data in a Chinese software doesn't make it secure. So the point is, it's a good concept, but from the data breach perspective, if you ask, is it going to be the number of attacks going to come down? My point is no.
Just to add to that, right? I think it'll actually get worse, the problem, because now as a data owner, I have my data in one place, right? Now I need to make a copy in India for the Indian customers. I need to make a copy in China for the Chinese customers, in America for the American customers. I now have 25 times the data distributed across 25 times the systems. And therefore, the cost or the effectiveness of my monitoring, my security defenses, my assessments, everything's increasing, right? So my focus, where there's data in one location and I'm really looking at it, versus this data distributed across 25 different countries with 25 different data localization, compliance, different laws that will impact that data, is going to make the security job much harder, in fact.
Just to add to it.
Sure. And then we will have your...
yes. I don't know how many of you remember the Geo app, which was reverse engineered 3 or 4 years before. If you look at the Geo app, it used to send your geolocation to 3 servers in India, and their backup server was in China. And the update that used to happen was without encryption, which means anybody can intercept your backup or DR activity that is happening and find out where is the Indian general traveling now and what is his geolocation. So when it comes to the DR part, are you planning to put your DR location in India itself? Then how do you address the data localization? These are the questions or challenges that we have.
Yeah, I think most regulators probably don't understand technology enough. That's one challenge why they're coming up with data localization laws. And I think the other thing is just censorship or whatever, right? In other countries where they want, I want full control of what's going in and out of my pipes, and so I want to regulate everything, right? And which is why so tomorrow Facebook cannot, put me in a difficult position where I don't know how to track this terrorist because I don't have access to that data, right? So the governments, I understand they're coming from the security angle and they think just because they have the data in here, they can override the cloud provider and somehow get access to the information at their fingertips, right? But if you look at Apple, they have vehemently opposed this whole philosophy in the US and have not given the keys to the US government despite so many fights and everything else. And so it makes sense. You have to give the power back to the consumer. It's consumers' data. Let them figure out what they want to do with it, right? Why are you making decisions at the policy level saying all this data has to reside in this country or that country? Right? I think it's silly. And from a security standpoint, like everybody else said, it doesn't add a whole lot, to be honest with you. Because the security engineers, the concentration, if you look at it, most of the best security minds, defenders, everything are still in the Western countries, more or less, right? They are better equipped to protect some of the information if it is stored there, as opposed to somewhere in like Geo or whoever, right? It's going to be much harder for them to do that.
Yeah. I hope Ambani is not kind of watching the live telecast, but all right. So we're just doing a bit of a time check here. So I'll ask a couple of questions where I would encourage you to keep your points very brief and to the point so that we have at least some time to take a bunch of questions from the audience here, right? So the first question I have for all three of you, starting with Manu, is just imagine a privacy-preserving internet, and how would you build one?
I personally don't believe there is no privacy as long as you're connected. So I don't think that is practically possible to build a 100% privacy effective. But still, in case if you want to attempt or build something that keeps resetting everything after probably 1 day or 2 hours and all those things, and maybe proper encryption so that no unauthorized access is possible. Some technologies we have to come out where only my data resides here and it is not stolen by anybody. Maybe encryption on the fly when data is at rest. So some of these are the points that we could consider. But personally speaking, I don't believe there is a privacy today and not in the near future.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's true that today, you cannot guarantee, of course, 100%, but I think there is hope with new technologies like especially differential privacy and homomorphic encryption. Once they become mainstream in the next few years, I feel that we could get to a place where we can have a privacy-preserving mechanism in place, I think. But we're a few years away from it, yeah.
So for me personally, I think the concept doesn't really exist. I don't think there's ever going to be a point where it's going to be a privacy-preserving internet, right? Because, I have a problem with the word unhackable every time I hear this term, because the concept of hacking is you look at what it is and you find ways to break what it's supposed to do, right? So when you talk about a privacy-preserving internet, no matter what you put into it, the concept is that its job is to protect privacy, and the hacker's going to find ways to go around that, right? Security is always an iterative process. You build better controls, the hacker's going to build better ways to break the controls, and hopefully in the meanwhile you haven't been complacent and you've built even better controls and you keep that cycle, that dance going, right? So, in my opinion at least, there's never one thing or one point that's going to result in a privacy-aware internet. And especially until you remove the human element from that whole equation.
Sure. So just for the organizers, if you want to pass on the mics, because right after this question, we'll take some audience question. So feel free to raise your hand, get the mic if you have a question in mind for the panelists. But I have one question before we move on to you guys. So all right, panelists, gaze into the crystal ball. The context is breaches. Tell us 2 or 3 things that are going to happen in the future from your personal experience, your personal understanding. Is it going to get worse, better, somewhere in the middle? Give us something.
Breaches are going to happen. All our data is already there on the internet. Some of us are aware, some of us are not aware. People who are technically sound, they are aware of what is the level of exposure. The second is data is money. So there is going to be more demand for your personal browsing preferences, where you prefer to travel, all your personal choices. So data is going to be breached. How we are going to address it is what is the point that we need to concentrate.
Yeah, I think we've already come to the conclusion that we have to assume breach, right? I mean, that's pretty much there. I think the biggest thing that we can do as individuals and as corporates is how do we reduce the damage to the greatest extent possible? And there are a few, I feel, technologies that are emerging. Like I said, differential privacy seems very promising to me, at least in some certain contexts. And if we can apply them at scale, I think things can improve over time. I am very pessimistic as a security guy, but as a human being, I'm more optimistic, so I would like to keep that with me, and that's why I want to take that.
So I don't think there is a getting better, right? I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where breaches reduce. What we'll probably see happen is people building systems and platforms with the assumption that there's a breach. So I like the Gmail example as a good example here, right? Today, if I give my Gmail password to all of y'all, the odds that you'll actually end up in my inbox are very low, right? Because second it says, hey, new browser, we want an OTP, different location, we need to validate again. Secondary controls, intelligent-based controls that are going to prevent breaches are where you'll really see a lot more coming out. Because breaches will happen, your data will go out, but companies have to sort of find a way to work around that and have less dependence on a static data set by saying this is a password or this is an Aadhaar ID or my social security number, and figure out better, more dynamic ways to have those assets. Like your Aadhaar OTP that happens now, or your two factors built in everywhere, you'll start seeing those improvements coming.
All right, cool. So we'll take some audience questions now. So there's a gentleman right here in the front. All right, so please introduce yourself. I'll leave it to you if you want to introduce the organization, because knowing the context helps them contextualize the answer, right? So please do that.
Sure. My name is Aditi. I'm from Media Nama. I have two short questions. One is about who buys this breached data. Of course, there are brokers, but who's eventually buying it? Advertising firms, e-commerce firms, who is it that's monetizing this data? And the second is that all of you talked about that there are no economic incentives for companies to actually boost their security, because it's cheaper for them to pay.
Can you hold up your mic a little bit?
Sorry. It's cheaper for companies to pay ransomware attackers or things like that, or just assume, or like the Zomato example where they thought that there hasn't been any tangible harm to their brand, therefore they can get away with it. Do you think a regulatory approach where they have to report to an authority and an authority can impose fine to the tune of, say, 4% of the turnover or 15 crore rupees, as is the case with the personal data protection bill, that's a useful step that will act as a deterrent, keeping in mind that globally that hasn't helped with Google, where children's data breaches, etc. I think EU imposed a 5 billion fine. Nothing really changed at Google after that. So just these two questions. Thank you.
Okay, so for everybody to hear the question, her first question was who is buying the data, whether e-commerce companies or what type. And second was the incentives around how to prevent some of these things, right? Like your Zomato example. So who wants to take this? Maybe all of you can give very brief inputs because we want more questions.
So on the who's buying it, it's not really going to be businesses, essentially. It's more hackers who are going to find other ways to sort of leverage that data and come up with better ROI on their investments. So buying healthcare data, putting it together with credit card data, being able to then go create a fake profile, get a social security number, then going and getting a housing mortgage on his name, fraud that takes it much further than just the credit card fraud. And we are also buying all of the data. So you'd be amazed how easy it is to buy breach data. It's literally a couple of dollars for pretty much most. So we literally buy pretty much every breach that comes out to study the data, to understand the data. And second, for me, the answer, again, really short answer on this is I think the regulatory approach is effective. Having done a lot of business in the EU, having done a lot of business in India as well, the challenge is there is a so what answer that customers give, right? You have a problem, there's going to be a breach. I don't have an answer for so what right now in India, right? So what? Sir, publish ho jayega. theek hai. Like, what does it matter, right? We don't really have, we're a media company, we don't really care about the brand in that perspective. We don't have financial data. So that so what is always there. And what I have seen working with the European customers at least is, with GDPR, with these things coming out, we see it being taken a lot more seriously, right? They have that answer to so what. There's going to be a fine, there's going to be a business impact, there's a reporting process. So we see them taking the thing a lot more seriously. And also I think it looks like a lot more breaches come out in the EU, but that's only because reporting the breaches is compulsory. Everyone in India is just sweeping it under the rug, right? So pretty much 1% of breaches actually come out to the public.
Yeah, I think to add to what he said, there's, of course, the commercial markets, the underground channels that sell, but there's also nation states, right? There are countries who want to buy data for obvious reasons, right? So it could go to them as well, and there's
Election
a whole
meddling.
whole economy around that, right? The second thing, regulations, yes, regulations are good in a way to push the agenda, but like you rightly said, Facebook paid $1 billion, whatever, fine, right? So I think we need to even step up further, especially Southeast Asia. If you look at it, I was there for quite some 2 years there. There is a jail term for the CEO if there is a data privacy breach, right? So that actually holds them accountable at the C level. Otherwise, what ends up happening is the CEO will just point to the CISO and the CISO gets fired, and that's the end of the story. So the accountability has to shift back to the business owner in this case, or the CEO of the company. And if there is a jail term to it, it's like if you were to do financial fraud today, you would end up going to jail as a CEO of the company. And it's the same for security. It's like, because security can impact a lot of the business decisions that you're making, right? So it has to be that level of accountability.
Manu,
I'll just add to the first question. So just assume you have the top 100 influential people in Bangalore's complete database. Who's going to benefit from it? Anybody who can do business with that data, they are going to buy it. Let's accept the fact. The second is the state-sponsored agencies or entities. The third one I would add is the threat intel companies. They are very much interested in all the data leaks and password leaks and all those things. So I would rate these three as the answer to your first question.
And her second question was around how to have the structure of incentives or disincentives to really prevent it, because right now nobody really cares.
Just to the first example that we quoted from Apple is a right answer to that. If you increase the amount of the bug bounty, the people attracted towards the black market will be less. It's something like the Singapore minister model, where the ministers are paid very huge amount as salaries so that they don't take the bribes and all those things. So some approach similar to that would address that problem.
All right, so let's have our next question. Yes.
My name is Ahas. I would like to have your insights. I would like to have your insights on one of the classical breaches which has happened on Ashley Madison online dating site. I would like to have your insights on how or if any changes have happened after that. What happened during that time was the data was lost of a lot of people, their lives. They had a lot of issues again in their personal life because of the data breach. But finally, the amount which was paid by the company in lawsuits and all was very less. We all know that. Has anything changed in that?
I don't think nothing much.
Just to be clear, has anything changed at Ashley Madison?
No. Actually, there is a change. Their market share has increased after that. But I want to know, it did increase. And after that, have in the industry any changes have come?
Got it.
This could be a new pitch, right? Like
yes.
breach for marketing.
So I'll just share one example that happened 2 to 3 months before. One of the very famous DJ in India, I know him personally. So he was kind of, you could say, honey trapped. Initially, a couple of requests came to his Facebook, Twitter, and then they started interacting and all those things. And slowly, they found a lot of information about him, his family, and then it was a Chinese mafia operating from Philippines. So what they started doing is started blackmailing him. They started calling their relatives and all those things. So just to come to the core point, the data that was breached could be utilized in a way that they use it for blackmailing or tracking you and all those things. Which, how do we monetize it, or how do we put a value to this?
People did suicide also after that.
Yes, lot of examples are there. So my point is, as of now, I don't see many major changes happening. These breaches really can affect our personal life, the business part, lot of.
The only potential change that probably happened is a lot of regular folks were made a lot more aware about cybersecurity, because breaches like Ashley Madden, they sell headlines, right? They're much more interesting than a Sony breach, which doesn't really have any end user impact. So these things are at least good for cybersecurity, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it is good for cybersecurity, especially for the companies who get impacted, because at least they start taking security more seriously a little bit. I mean, any of these companies who have had a breach, I think I feel it's a blessing in disguise in many ways, because that forces them to think about security, because otherwise they would not, right? So
the pending budget's always going to prove that.
Their market share increased because of the breach.
All right, so we'll take more questions for the benefit of everyone. So there was a question from a gentleman here in the front. I think this you wanted to answer. You had a question from the start.
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, this is Arman Sheikh from silentmodesec.com. Sir, my question is to Yash, sir. How many data breaching case you have dealt with, and what was the which case was the toughest case in this 14 years of time period in security brigade, right? Yeah.
I mean, I can't really go into names of who was breached, but I can't even, honestly, I can't even tell you how big a problem it is.
Okay.
It wouldn't be an exaggeration to see that we'll run across one case every single week for the last 14 years. So it's all over the place, right? Every time you're doing an assessment, you're looking at anything, you'll suddenly find some backdoor somewhere. You'll suddenly find a tremendous amount of data where there's evidence that this data has gone out already. It's incredibly common across. I'm not even saying that it's smaller companies, as in we've seen it at large financial institutions, we've seen it at healthcare institutions in India within the domestic space, right? It's tremendous the amount of breaches that do take place. So, which is one of the reasons as well for me, I think breach notification should be the absolute first priority. There is nothing that forces a company to tell you that the breach has happened, right? So you don't really know how bad the problem is until your data comes on the dark web, and then you get those emails telling you that you have been captured on screenshots and you need to pay some Bitcoin to get your data back, stuff of that nature.
All right, we'll take two more questions. There's one here.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Salman. I'm a Blue Team member at Microsoft. My question to all of you is, you touched upon the bug bounty programs. So as a defender myself, we are already dealing with, tracking national and state actors and things like that. And now we have the bug bounty programs where you rightly said, the person could go rogue. So how do we prepare for it? And also on the lighter note, you also touched upon, everybody being hacked, right? And everybody being aware of it and nobody caring about it, right? So if I just hit have I been pawned on my most commonly used email and Zomato and anything, we see that it's being hacked. So we as fresh security guys in our careers, should we pack our bags because nobody is caring about it anymore?
So I'm afraid I kind of did not get the question, but I lost the question, that to be honest, so maybe I zoned out a bit.
Question was not audible, first of all. Like if you can just check the mic.
Close your mic.
Yeah. So I don't know, there's some flickering. Okay. My first question was on the bug bounty programs, right? So how do we track for this, and how do we as defenders be prepared on this?
Just to clarify, you mean on because the volume of attacks is increasing, you don't really know if it's a legitimate attack or an illegitimate attack.
Right. And the background is from a blue team in Microsoft. So as a defender, how can they prepare themselves, right? So let's take some very quick takes. Very brief, quick takes.
There isn't a good way for you on the defender level to do anything. It has to be more institutional. So if you look at the Facebook bounty program, for example, they have a whole separate environment, separate accounts that you have to register in, put through when you actually do your testing, right? So then from a defense standpoint, you know whether it's a bug bounty hunter or if it's a legitimate attacker. Yeah. So it's more institutional, I think. But you have to respond to everything as the same, right? Because if I'm a bug bounty attacker and if I'm compromising a core system, are you going to stop me or no? It's still your data, it's still your liability, so.
Yeah, I would agree. You can basically stop the attack right there. Even if the bug bounty hunter is testing, if you have the visibility, your blue team should be able to stop them, right? And then you can actually do a real world red versus blue for you, right?
We'll do one thing. We'll have more closed discussions outside if that's all right with you, right? So, Manu, your take on how he can do a better job?
2 points. One is monitoring, regular monitoring on what's happening, where the attack or the testing is progressing, and is it within the boundaries. First is the monitoring, and second is what Yash said, have separate mechanisms to identify who is the researcher who is doing the testing, and whatever is outside the circle is an attack for you, probably.
But it's hard to do that unless you're going through HackerOne or something like that, right?
Yes. Some mechanism has to be in place where, either you don't do it in a production network, but taking the example of Facebook, you are allowed to do it on live, so then you should have a mechanism to identify.
So it's almost like an institutional mindset rather than one individual. All right. So we'll take one last question. You're very welcome to interact with the panelist over here, offline. But there is one question here, gentleman in the red t-shirt.
Hello. Yeah. My name is Raju. I know most of us here are we are working in a private companies, and we follow industry standards like NIST and other regulatory and compliances. But my question is we know in India most of the digitalization is happening, especially in government sites, and is there any idea do you guys have whether government of India is taking any following any security standards, or organizations like these like NULLCON or any organizations, they are going to help India to secure their most of our data. Is there any info
So I'll
on
answer
that?
a part of that, right? So I think Certain and Nick have been doing a great job in terms of implementing processes and systems in place. And I see them doing a lot of really promising things. The challenge is, to some degree, the Indian jugaad, right? So I'll give you an example. I don't know how many of you understand the process, but there's something called Certain Empaneled Vendor, right? So in India, every government agency has to get an audit done by a certain empaneled company before they can go live into the internet, right? And the challenge is, there's this one company that we heard about through a customer that was selling certificates for 5,000 rupees flat. No audit to be done, no testing to be done. Come, raise an order, give me 5,000 rupees, I'll give you a certificate back, you can go live with that, right? So the government is taking a lot of effort. It's companies that have to now so the question is, when you, as a government agency, you typically outsource your development, right? Do you put pressure on your vendor contractually saying you need to go to a good security vendor, get a certificate, follow these best practices? We need to start contractually building those things in and take that ownership, as opposed to just regulation and, making sure we check the boxes.
So Manu, your take, what's India doing for this?
If you just don't look at what is happening today, if you look at the progress that happened in the last 15 years or 10 years, you'll see a lot of progress happening from the government side. One simple example I can quote, which I don't know how relevant it is, 10 years before, because I'm also running a conference like this, 10 years before, we used to go behind government officials, please come and attend conferences like NULLCON or XYZ conference. Now today, the scenario has completely changed. Now they are coming and say, we want 10 passes, 20 passes, we want to attend. And so you can see there is a change. Secondly, the feedbacks that they take from here are definitely considered, and they look into it. A lot of things are happening. But as I started the first point, 2 days before, I was interacting with a couple of students where I was teaching them digital certificates. So one student asked, sir, in India, if I want a digital certificate, what is the process? Which is the agency? And I said CCA. The student opened the CCA website, and it is not HTTPS. So that's the paradigm, or, that's the state. But there is no personal data there. Things are improving. I believe in the next 5 years, we should have a better posture as far as security is concerned. But I would say, yes, we are on the right track. We need more time, basically.
I reserved that to this. So you said the CCA site we opened, and actually didn't find people HTTPS.
Yes.
Why by default it is not opening HTTPS? Why by the default it is not going to incognito mode? So these things could be done by at least two people. The browser owner or the software developer, if he forces the individual to open it in incognito, so he will not do mistakes by chance. He knows that he is starting with the security.
Yes. So here comes the first triangle problem, the functionality, usability, security. If we go to incognito mode, every time I have to add my Gmail username, password, or Facebook, four sites I log in, 4 times I have to enter it. So that's why some people prefer to go with not the incognito, the regular mode, basically. So what point you said is more from the security point. I agree to it. But here comes the, the usability or the functionality part.
I think Suchit can answer this. What would the conversion team at Uber say to having incognito by default? The business conversions will be down 50%, 100%.
Yeah, so if you're looking at 1 billion users as your customers, it's just not going to fly, right? You cannot cater for all the audience there.
All right, gentlemen, we'll bring our panel to a closure. We have been pointed out twice that we have run out of time. So thank you so much for all of your time. I hope it was interesting. We discussed a lot of interesting topics. We also discussed how to build a startup in kind of data hacking. And thank you, panelists, for your valuable time. And if any one of you would like to catch up with these gentlemen outside, feel free to do that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhaskar.